So today we get to do a fun episode for you guys. This is in response to a listener question, and I'm just going to read it here real quick. It says, I'm going to start again and read it exactly how it's written. How to still be husband and wife after stepping into mom and dad. I find that after having our first child, when we don't have her, it exposes our lack of relationship. So I'm really excited to jump into this with Elisha. This is a big focus point in our marriage. We want to have a lot of rich relationship outside of being parents, although that's an incredible thing that we get to do together. And so I'm really excited to share with you guys our thoughts on this. If you enjoyed this episode, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and we have loved when you guys have shared our episodes with those who you love. That's how this podcast spreads. And it is so incredible to be garnering just the amount of families and the quality of families to this podcast. When we get to know you guys, when we meet you out in public, it is just such a blessing to us to just be on the same team as you guys. And we want to thank you guys for letting us know that you're out there and letting everyone else who is also raising their children in this generation know that they aren't alone in this and seeking out resources and wanting to do what Scripture says when it comes to family. So anyways, hope you guys enjoy this episode. We're going to get it started.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Okay, Katie, there's a bunch that I want to talk about, not only in regards to today's topic, but I want to catch our audience up on your recent trip with your sisters and your girl cousins and your aunts and your grandma even, which sounds like it was a pretty cool trip that you just got back from. But before we do that, I do want to let our listeners know that we've got some new features in Voberg Music Academy. You've probably heard about Voberg Music Academy if you've listened to our podcast for any amount of time. That's the online music school that we started over 7 years ago now, which is pretty crazy, almost 8 years ago. So when we started Voberg Music Academy, and we are more fired up than ever. I think the main reason is because we now have our own children learning via Voberg Music Academy. And so that has sparked more new ideas for me to, implement into Voberg Music Academy. And so I'm more fired up about teaching than ever. I'm more fired up about family music than ever. And so as a result of this, we are now offering monthly lives for all of the students. If you've got any questions and you just want to connect with your teacher, we now have that in the community page. We also have a monthly sharing time for all of our students, because we see this in our kids now. When they've got a performance on the calendar, their practice goes to the next level and their excitement goes to the next level. And so we wanted this for our own children, to have this opportunity on a monthly basis to perform for the other students on Voberg Music Academy, to have something to work towards. So we're doing that on Voberg Music Academy. If you're not already a part of the community page, it's really easy. If you're a Voberg Music Academy student, you just go to the top right of your homepage and click community, and then you're basically there and you can see where those upcoming live events are. But I did want to let you all know about that. Are there any other new features that we have?
No, that's it.
That's it. We got some in the pike, though, which we're excited
about. Yeah, we do. We're doing a lot with that. Just because, again, we see the joy of music so much in our own home. And so it's really revived this new excitement for us to encourage other people with that. We wish we could do the whole in-person thing for everybody, everywhere. And unfortunately, that's not the case. We are a big fan of stuff being in person. But what I love, I keep getting surprised that my mic is right there. What I think we love about Voberg Music Academy is that while our children will go in a room and learn on a screen how to play a song, that gives us hours and hours and hours of them just wanting to take out their instrument and play around the house.
Yes.
And so that's something that's very fun for us to see, is that once they learn these songs, we don't have to ask our kids to practice ever. They just get their instruments and it gives them hours of enjoyment, and it gives us hours of enjoyment as parents. So anyways, that's enough about the music spiel, but it's our current soapbox. And then my trip.
Yeah, kind of what sparked this conversation even around marriage was a lot of the things you took away from this weekend. And it's not that we need to explain what your girls' weekend was, but it was pretty cool that your aunt, Jolinda, really put forth a ton of effort to make this happen, because Jolinda is your mom's sister, and they have a great relationship, and they have daughters, and they wanted to pour into not just their daughters, but as many of the female cousins and aunts on your mom's side of the family as they could. So they put together this awesome event down in Southern California in San Clemente. And so, yeah, what was that? What was the impetus of that? And what was your big takeaways?
Well, it was really special because it was the first time I'd ever, I guess you flew me back for my birthday one year with Lewis to visit my sister.
Okay.
But that's the one time I've left to do just a girls thing.
Wow.
That I can remember.
Yeah.
And so it was it's not something that I typically do. I was gone for 3 days and
it was out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I really felt like I should be there. And I brought Lionel with me, obviously, because he's still nursing. So that was nice. But it was such a special time. I think the thing that really stuck out to me is one, Aunt Jolinda and Aunt Rachel putting so much effort into planning this event. And then also just the impact of their multi-generational vision, I guess, because we had, I had an aunt fly out from Tennessee. All of us girls were there from Kentucky, Colorado. There were some California locals that drove 6 or 7 hours to be there. I'm from Idaho. We had people from Oregon, and it was just such a blessing that we all were hungry for this connection. And I got to connect with some of my female cousins that I just haven't connected with in years and years. And yet here we are, and we're all raising kids together. And I say together because we have our faith in common and we have blood in common, which makes it so enjoyable to get together and be like, I don't know, we're family. We're doing this together. It's so cool. So anyways, it was really special. Something that stuck out to me was we had an aunt panel one of the nights. And so we had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 of my aunts. Some of them, 3 of them are grandmas.
Wow.
A couple of them are getting close to being empty nesters. And they were giving their wisdom on everything from personal development to marriage to discipline to parenting, all aspects of parenting. And it was so cool to see the common threads that were there across the board, because they all have very different families and different amounts of children and different things that, different avenues that their families took. But when you hear, well, one, it sticks out that they all really believe the Bible and they all have very real breathing relationships with the Lord that are prioritized. And so that was a common thread that stuck out. And then also when it came to their marriages, it really stuck out that each one of their husbands is a very blessed man. And the fact that each one of them have great friendships with their husbands at these seasons. They have just vibrant, healthy lives as married couples. And I think that's so cool. They've been married 20, 30 plus years, all of them.
Yeah. It's something that you told me stuck out to you was just how highly they spoke of their husbands, like in a public facing setting where they just spoke highly of their husbands. You could tell they had this real respect and kind of like honor. They honored their husbands in the way they spoke about them, which again, like, that shouldn't, it's like, yeah, of course, you knew that they were Christians, you knew that they valued marriage, but for whatever reason that stood out, and that's kind of telling to what's almost expected in today's culture, where you would get together maybe at a girls' weekend or at a, even if it's a Christian girls' weekend, oftentimes I think the stereotype is to almost have this kind of like husband bashing time.
Like there was not one cheap joke about, your husband being your extra child or something like that. There was just a reverence across the board. And that really stuck out to me.
Wow.
Because again, our from a child's perspective, watching these aunts, their lives all looked different.
Yeah.
Who was working when, how they raised their children, how they schooled their children, how they churched their children. Yeah. All those things were very different.
Yeah.
But those grounding principles of having an incredible marriage based on an incredible faith is what makes the bedrock of all their other decisions. Yeah. And is what makes them all successful.
Yeah, it seems like there's this this assumed reverence for the what's the word, the institution of marriage that maybe was assumed a generation prior to ours that now is sometimes questioned or disregarded. And even in regards to today's question about how we keep marriage, really, I don't know what the verbiage is, but how we stay.
Yeah, how to still be husband and wife after stepping into mom and dad.
Yeah, and I do think, like you said, the bedrock or the foundation for marriage needs to be like in this, even if it's just a cerebral understanding of this is a holy institution. It is different than any other relationship or institution here on earth, and it's special, and therefore is going to demand and require, and it's deserving of more time and energy and input and investment than any other institution or relationship that I'm going to be a part of here in this earth, in this physical world that we are experiencing life on. And so that fundamental understanding sometimes I think does get pushed aside in today's culture, even in Christian culture, where it does seem like, people will talk about the romance or they'll talk about the friendship. But I think having a very sober perspective of what the institution is seems to be something that was a theme in your aunts, and maybe it was more common in the generation before us in the church. But I do think, again, I want to get into practical tactics on how we do keep our marriage romantic and fun and playful. But I think if you are going to make, the only reason that I think we feel inclined to make efforts in that direction is because we've got a real reverence for marriage and for what it is.
Yeah, you mentioned that, the generation before us maybe had that more naturally or culturally or those things. But that's the interesting thing. So many women these ages are filing for divorces.
Yes.
Their kids are raised,
Yep.
and they have no relationship with their spouse.
Yeah.
There's nothing keeping them in the marriage now.
Right.
And so I think there's an epidemic of women who have been married. And I say women because women are the ones who file for divorce. Over 70% of divorces the woman is filing. And they just don't want to be in the marriage anymore for whatever reason. Maybe their kids were keeping them in it up until that point, but then they just decided, hey, I'm over it.
Yeah.
And so it was really novel for me to see, there's at no point is a solid marriage guaranteed. And something that was coming up with every one of my aunts and my mom were all the book recommendations. Oh, I read this book on marriage. I read this book on parenting. I read this. And they've been married for so many years. And up there, they are just speaking from this overabundance of still learning in their day in and day out lives.
Yeah.
How to serve their husbands more, how to be more effective as a grandparent, as a mom. And they just never stop learning and growing.
Yeah.
And I think that's, some of the that was one of the common themes. All of them are all learners and growers, have hobbies outside of parenting and are pushing themselves to grow outside of parenting. And then also, and that just makes you more interesting, I feel like, to your spouse too. Because you can talk about the kids, and we talk about our children a lot. It's very enjoyable and it's very necessary, but it's nice to have a break from that and just be able to talk about other things.
Yes.
When your husband married you, he married you because you had interest, and most likely, most of them weren't parenting. Very few of us entered into marriage with children already. And so it's like there was this, what did you guys talk about before? That's what he loved.
Yeah.
And it was fun. One of my aunts, she's very adventurous, and she still keeps that adventurous spirit now. She's talking about how when her and her husband go on dates, they alternate planning their dates. So he goes and does whatever she decides would be a fun activity, and she will go do whatever he decides is a fun activity, which I think is fun if you just want to mix it up and maybe put your spouse in an uncomfortable context. I think uncomfortability in marriage is really fun for bonding because anytime there's adrenaline or uncomfortability, then that brings spark into the marriage because you aren't comfortable. And afterwards, when you can relax, you're like, oh, that was awesome.
Yeah.
That was fun. And you naturally have that when you're dating. But then that can tend to just give way to just comfort all the time in marriage.
Yes. Yeah, I think that you think about ruts, and even on that topic of doing things that are outside of your spouse's comfort zone, something that I think you've done a really good job of, even if we are doing something that's outside of my comfort zone, is that you really honor me and respect me in those situations. Because I know, again, this is like total basic, Christian 101 stuff and not being embarrassed or having an ego. But it's still like, even as a grown man, I do something that I'm not good at or that I'm uncomfortable with, and like my ego gets involved quickly, where it's just kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to look dumb, or I've never done this before. I don't want to go to, an art class or a painting class. I'm not good with the brush, and yet when I'm in those environments, you are so like encouraging, and you're not patronizing and condescending, because I think that could really,
that's a good point.
There could be I think that happens sometimes prior to marriage, where I was like, well, I don't want to get outside my comfort zone ever again with you, because I
wasn't sensitive. Yeah, we don't want to put our husbands in situations where we're laughing at them.
Right. Yes.
And vice versa.
Yeah, so there needs to be this mindset of like, kind of like, hey, we're going to try this thing together, and we both might be uncomfortable, but I know you're awesome. And I don't know. You know your spouse, and you know how to do it. Because I wouldn't want to do the same thing for you. Just be like, well, hey, like,
no, it's not with a spiteful spirit or wanting to make a fool out of your spouse, or even with the naivety to think that it will be funny to laugh at your spouse and they won't think it's a big deal.
Yes.
Because I think that is where a lot of my lack of respect has stemmed from, was not a lack of sincerity, but just from an ignorance of knowing Elisha.
Oh,
and
sure.
I think hopefully we can build on that and not keep making those same mistakes.
No doubt.
As we get to know our spouses better and realize, oh, well, that's not really funny to them. That's a really big deal. So, I mean, something that she brought up was like still going and poaching hot tubs at like hotels or something like that. And my mom's just like, you shouldn't do that. You should go to the lobby. And that's what her and my dad would do. They would go to hotel lobbies at really, really nice, expensive hotels and just like order a drink or order a dessert and sit there and have a date. But, that was the rule following sister and the rule breaking sister. But the point is that my uncle married the rule breaking sister. And so the fact that she still has that spunk, it's something that he married her for, And so I think it's really fun that they still do stuff like that.
Yes.
That's true to who she was.
Right.
When they got married. So anyways, having those things to talk about. The way that this question was phrased, I really appreciate. And that is, when we don't have our first child, or when we don't have our child with us, it exposes our lack of relationship.
Yeah.
And this is why we are such big fans of going on dates, going on an overnight here or there. I know it's really hard to do financially and really hard to do. I mean, you don't just want to give your children to anybody, obviously. But even if this isn't feasible to work into your daily life, it's not just for building your marriage. It's also a great litmus test.
That sounds good.
Yeah. That's the word I want to say, but I'm not actually sure what it means. For where is your relationship at? Do you have a fun relationship where you are best friends and you're just like, oh my goodness, our time's up. We're going to go back home. We had a blast together. Or are you sitting there twiddling your thumbs or getting into arguments over stuff that you just have been too busy to talk about before, and so you don't have to address it? Or you're just annoyed at your spouse and the way they're behaving out in public. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like there's just, where's your relationship? Because it's way better that, this gal says they've had their first child, that you're realizing, oh, okay, we need to put some effort in here.
Yes.
We don't have a relationship, versus 20 years from now, you go on your first date without children.
Yeah, I mean, dates have really revealed a lot of shortcomings in our marriage, or some things that need, working on. It's so funny. You talk about us going on a date and you being triggered by me being distracted by the television in a restaurant. That's happened numerous times where you're like,
it hasn't happened for years though.
Yeah, I think I've come a long way not being distracted, or I'm just smart enough to make sure we go to a restaurant that doesn't have, a sports bar in the corner. And then there's also been times too where either one of us have been frustrated because, say, I just keep talking about work and I'm stressed and I keep talking about these problems, and you're like, why can't, can we talk about something? I mean, these are like very stereotypical things, and yet we've struggled with the things. We're only talking about the kids, talking about the kids' schooling. There being times where from my perspective, it seemed like all you wanted to talk about was like what homeschool curriculum we were going to use for our kids on every date. I'm like, come on.
Well, I was just talking about that 24/7 actually, and it was revealed on our date that that's all I was talking about. Because I started noticing, like when the kids are there, I don't realize that every time you come in, that's all I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Anytime you come into the house. But then when we were on our date, it was dawning on me like, this is all I am talking about. It's like, are you frustrated that this is all I'm talking about? I think I caught myself on that one. You're like, well, sometimes.
You know what's funny is that because we had that, kind of confrontation, and we've had that numerous times in our marriage where we're like, okay, this is an issue. And oftentimes you don't know a clear way out. And I think even in the whole home, you liking to talk about homeschooling a lot. We got like a game to play. Remember that? We got like that trivia game because we just wanted like a way out of this cycle. Always being what we're talking about.
And even that, it was just like talking about the kids. I was essentially just talking about the kids. We were taking pretty much a complete break. I think we were still doing the podcast, like very part-time-ish. We were taking a complete break from talking about anything else work-related.
Well, this is when you made the hard stop from doing anything work-related.
Yeah.
And so I was doing, and that was
and I didn't want to hear about any work because I thought, oh, that's going to suck me back in if I even hear what you're doing. And we agreed we wanted to do that.
Yeah.
But it didn't.
But then we're like, well, now what do we talk about?
Exactly. I don't want to hear about your work, so I'm just going to talk to you about the kids. And yeah, that was a really funny season in our marriage. It was like a couple months.
Yeah, but I remember how helpful it was just to have like this card game and we hated the game, and that was bonding because we were like, who got that? This is the dumbest game ever. We were just making fun of the questions in the card game, and that was like a fun icebreaker back into the like, oh, that's right, we can talk about a bunch of different topics and have a blast with one another. But I do remember, I don't know if you felt it, but I do remember feeling a bit in this, like, it was a conundrum where we're like, how do we get out of this? I mean, I still like you. We obviously are still in love and we care about our marriage, but how do we talk about other things? Because we felt very stuck.
I know, it was interesting, but I do think that a lot of it that was all that I was reading. That was all I was researching. That was all I had to talk about. And I didn't have any other interests at the time. And so that was just kind of a tricky place to be in. And I think of, since then we have realized, we can actually do a lot of stuff together. It's not all or nothing. We can work some together and I don't get sucked back in like I was so worried I would. And so that's really a blessing. But that was really fun too, because we had this element of carefree timelessness for our relationship. Because that night that we played that game, it was around a fire and we stayed up all night till like 3 a.m, just hanging out and visiting, talking our favorite books and authors and random stuff until 3 a.m. Now, I've never done that in my entire life. I've never been like a night person, but sometimes that's a really special thing to do in your relationship, is just break all the rules for the sake of the friendship and the relationship. Yeah. And that was so bonding and it felt so crazy to me. And it was something you would do when you were dating. You just like want to hang out. And sometimes as a mom, I can get so on a schedule that I love that it can really, relationships don't always thrive in schedules. And so you have to make times to just say, okay, this is going to be a time where we aren't going to put all these boundaries on it.
Yeah. A time that stands out to me, a story that stands out to me where you really made an effort for our relationship. And it meant so much to me it was when we were living in the trailer, and it just felt like we were living 2 separate lives. Like we would obviously sleep together and we were parenting together, but then other than that, it's like I had my interests and you had your interests. And we were coping in our own ways. I think that was part of the problem.
Yeah, it was a really hard season.
It was a challenging season living in that little trailer with all the kids. But it was, once again, I didn't know. I tried to communicate. I think I wrote you a letter or something because I was trying to communicate. Or did I write you a long text? Because I was trying to communicate to you that I wanted to connect more. I was like, I want to be able to have more like off-topic conversations and not have them always be triggering or like have it. I just want to be able to talk, like process things. Because for a couple of years in our marriage, I'm sure you listeners can imagine, I like to just verbally process, pontificate, kind of talk things out. And oftentimes I would want to do that just to talk it out, not to come to any conclusion. And I think Katie came into the marriage with more of a mindset. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's like, if you're going to talk, like there better be a point to it. And so she would always try to get to the point as soon as possible. And that would cause some friction. And I think I was really feeling it in this season. And I can remember it was so thoughtful of you, because you had your podcasts, your books, your whatever sermons you were listening to, and I had mine. And we listened to a podcast together, and you just got like so into it. You remember that? I still remember. It was the White Horse Inn. Dr. Michael Horton, just a podcast on Romans. I think it was just like I think he was calling it the tinderbox of the Protestant Reformation. And you like got into it. And you're like, this is so interesting. And you were like researching different passages and different books that he was talking about. And that meant so much to me because it was so outside of your norm for what you would consume. But you did that with me and really forming for the relationship. And that really stands out as one of those times that you made the effort to do something that wasn't of common interest, really, but you made it of common interest for the sake of our marriage. So anyways, thanks for that. Yeah.
That's sweet. I do remember that. Because that became an interest of mine. Mm-hmm. And I do think that that's the beauty of marriage is as you expose your spouse to interests of yours and they take interest in them, then eventually they can be both of your interests. Yeah. Not all of them, but you can develop common interests together for the first time, and then also your spouse.
Yes.
Can bring a lot of things into your world that just weren't there before. And at this point that you're speaking about this, we were in the trailer. We'd been married, I think, 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I look back, we had quite a few of those courageous conversations in the trailer.
Yeah.
And honestly, that year, those 6 months that we were there specifically, was a total change in the trajectory of our marriage. Yeah. I loved our marriage up until that point. It was great, but I feel like we entered into a new level of depth and communication and understanding and having each other's backs there.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what you feel like, but I think things were off limits and
exactly.
too triggering, too hot buttony until there.
Yeah. I mean, and again, maybe it wasn't just that instance, but I felt like that was a turning point and like maybe having more trust in you, being more willing to talk about anything and everything openly, because I was a lot more comfortable with like, okay, she'll hear me out. She's not going to jump to conclusions. She's not going to cut me off. And I think, like you said, that came from a handful of our courageous conversations. And we would always have to leave so like the kids would be asleep in the trailer, then we'd have to go out to the car right outside the trailer and have these conversations. We spent a lot of time out there, having our conversations. So.
Well, I think of that too. Yeah, we'd walk your parents' driveway and talk. And I think that, because that clicks in my brain as the time when it's interesting to hear from your perspective, because that's when you started becoming more open with me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't exactly know why. We were both working on so much in our marriage at that season, but that was when I felt like, oh, you'll tell me if you're upset. Mm-hmm. It won't go like a week or 2 weeks or something. You just communicate why. And anyways, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Felt like you stopped stuffing as much then. And maybe I stopped blowing up as much. I don't know. But we really reached a new level in our marriage in that season of relationship, which is really sweet. But going, back to even those dates and those times without your children, spend those times, even if it's once a year. Like, it doesn't have to be your go-to. You don't have to be the weekly date night person. But I do think you need to actually do an actual test to see where your relationship is. And you don't know how good your relationship is without children unless you actually try.
Yeah, and we've shared this before. It was maybe 3 years ago. I can't remember, a couple years ago. We had been looking forward to this Hawaii trip for a long time. We planned it like 9 months in advance, that's a long time in advance for us. And we had babysitters lined up.
We were basing it around like nursing and
exactly.
pregnancy and all that.
And it was 6 nights in Maui, and we were like just so looking forward to it for so long. And we got there, and I mean, we had like the biggest fights of that year, maybe of like maybe for a couple years, those first couple days, because it's like, wow, here we are with each other with no distractions. We've been really banking on this thing being a fun, romantic, carefree time that's going to be a blessing to our marriage. And the first thing it did was reveal a lot of shortcomings in our marriage. Fortunately, we had the hard conversations, and I'd say the second half of the trip was really fun. But again, it revealed a lot. And I think that's another thing that marriage conferences do, or marriage workshops, is like, they're not that fun when you're when you're at them oftentimes, or they're not that like fulfilling or rewarding, but they reveal a lot in your marriage. At least that's been our experience. And so I do think having something like that, like you said, on an annual basis is ideal. But then, and I don't know if you want to speak any more to that, but I do think there are more daily things that we do too. There's some things I was going to bring up, that we make a point to go to bed early together. I think, again, this is like very, very basic, but like, not having phones or computers in bed. And not only just going to bed early.
Or TVs.
Yeah,
I forget
TVs.
that's the thing in a lot of people's bedrooms.
Right. Yep. Especially recently, because it's like going to bed early, one, big time increases the potential for physical intimacy. Just it's like you've got more time, there's more carefree time. And then even in addition to that, it opens the door for a lot more carefree conversation. I think of that especially recently. It's been so nice being able to just talk with you in bed, because we're getting in bed early enough so that we're not stressed about the next morning, because it's one thing when you're like, man, the alarm's set, like, hey, shake your hand, okay, see you in the morning, comrade. And so when we go to bed early enough, we can really debrief the day. We can talk about the next day. And then a lot of times those conversations lead into just random conversations that are fun. And I get to hear about your ideas on random topics and vice versa. And those don't happen if we are, getting into bed a little too late. So anyways, I'm a huge fan of just going to bed early together for the obvious benefit of physical intimacy, which is such a healthy thing for marriages, and then the carefree conversation, which is so good for connecting.
I agree. We've had some fun like pillow talk conversations. We're just like, oh, this is so fun. And yeah, again, there's no pressure on the moment. And I think often kids provide this pressure of something needs to be done. And that's what's really comforting a lot of times.
Yes.
And we fall into just like taking care of needs. And it's nice that that's done for us. Our path is clearly laid out because someone needs us. And I think that that's what hit in Hawaii is we'd been starving our marriage saying, well, this big blown out trip we're going to do, that's going to take care of all the stuff we aren't doing right now. We're going to make up for it on the big trip.
Yes.
And that was the lie.
That exactly.
Was, we can starve our marriage now and just gorge on good relationship later. And that's not how it works.
Wow. Yeah. A way to think about it, I think, is, obviously it's easy to connect over children because that is such a worthy mission. And nothing is more bonding than being like-minded on a mission. And that's the case, when people are whatever in a startup company together and they know what the mission is, or you're on a sports team and you know what the goal is, or you're in a battle, soldiers, they talk about the bond, like when you're so clear on your mission and you're working with somebody on that. And so oftentimes you're like, well, this is good, we're very clear on the mission of our children, but the problem is that you don't view your marriage as a mission. And so you're like, man, we're actually undermining the mission that should be more prioritized, and that is our marriage. And from that, then you join together and you do pursue the mission of your children. And so I think that when that is removed, as she's already alluding to, and she gets like, children are a worthy mission, but not at the expense of your marriage, because the best thing you can do for your children is have a healthy, thriving marriage. And that's the great lie. And there's so much deceit in that within our culture that, well, hey, later we'll be able to pour into our marriage. Like, oh man, each week that goes by, each month that goes by where you're prioritizing your children over your marriage, it's going to make those empty nested years really challenging. You're like, wow, 10 years just went by, 15 years just went by where we were not dating. We were not in tune with our partners, with our spouse's interests and what they were learning and what and how they were growing. That's a lot to try to make up, a lot of time to try to make up.
Yeah, and I think there's also something, you brought up physical intimacy, and I think there's this lie too that, okay, well, we're in these childbearing years right now. there's a lot of hormones, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of babies needing us and sleepless nights and all those things. So we can also put physical intimacy kind of on the back burner. It can be this optional thing that happens every once in a while. And then later in life, we're going to have more time, we're going to have more energy, we'll have maybe less body image struggles and all those things. But what you see is that life just keeps going and those things don't go away. New things come in to take our time. And all of a sudden we're dealing with the emotional side of, our children aren't waking up 4 hours, every 4 hours or whatever during the night. But now they are dating someone that we really think's a bad situation for them. Or they are, making decisions that we're trying to figure out how do we guide them through those decisions. Or they're just lost and they don't have a vision for their life. We're trying to figure out how can we help them with this?
Well, then they're newlyweds and they're working through issues and then they're pregnant and then they're...
Like the demands do not stop of our children, especially when you have a multi-generational vision. It's not like we invest in our children until they're 18 and then we just go on our merry way. Yeah. A true caring parent is invested in their child and whether their child is sinking or swimming indefinitely. Yeah. And so if we don't have time for those things now, I think too, the whole, our body image and struggling with that as women through pregnancy and postpartum and all these things, if we don't start flexing that mind over matter muscle when it comes to physical intimacy now, that's not going to go away because guess what? We're going to age. Aging starts happening. And all of a sudden we look back at when we were 30 and we thought we had extra baby weight and we're like, wow, we look pretty darn good, And so if that can't be a factor when it comes to us pursuing our husbands or allowing ourselves to be desired by them. And then, okay, maybe there's seasons where it's, uncomfortable or things like that, but then you go through menopause as a woman. I don't even know what that's like, but I hear stories. And something that I really admired, I guess, was these older, not old, but older women on a panel who have gone through season after season after season after season and have made these things a joy throughout all the seasons and have figured out how to make it work and figured out how to connect with their husbands emotionally and physically and mentally and spiritually in every season of life. And that is the wife that I want to be by God's grace. In every single season, we need to figure out new things to make it work and new things to make it enjoyable and new ways to pursue relationship. And that learning and growing, that's where that learning and growing comes in. We can't just write off any season. We need to prioritize our marriage in every single season. And Lord willing, we'll get better and better and better at that. Yeah,
that is so good to hear. And I want to remember that. Just like you said, you said so many things that were noteworthy and very helpful. But yeah, like the lie that you can press pause on something in any relationship or on any season in life, it's not true. You can't do that. And so I think when you're I'm just going to set marriage aside, or we'll get back to whatever physical intimacy or dating or having our courageous conversations if this needed, we'll get back to that. It's that both of you guys are going a direction during that time. And if you're not proactively growing together and growing aligned with one another, then you are growing apart, and there's a chasm that's being created there. That's really sobering to, for me to remember, because it's so tempting to fall into that, especially in the busy seasons of just the little things that we know are helpful to our marriage. We'll plan our week next week, or we'll get back to praying, as a family, or we'll get back to family Bible times or whatever. Different things that, or even when we get off of going to bed together,
because that, we talk about what a blessing that is, but there are definitely seasons where that gets out of
exactly.
Because I do tend to be more of an early to bed person, just naturally. I get so fatigued, and sometimes you prefer time to wind down on your own.
Yes.
And so sometimes that can go from being a one-off or, an exception to being the rule. And then we're whoa, we are just like ships passing in the night.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I do think that in that situation, it's obvious for me that it's incumbent upon me to be the one that goes to bed. Wait, the ball's in my court here. It's not your obligation to stay up later to be with me so that you can go to bed at whatever 10:30
Well,
or
there's
11.
times when that happens too.
You've done it out of like the kindness of your heart, but it's always convicting.
I enjoy hanging out with you.
Yeah. So whatever. Obviously, you can work together in your marriage. But I love just your parents talk about this so often, the 100% mindset and the 100% mindset, and taking 100% responsibility, having that 100% ownership or, stewardship mindset for your marriage and it's way easier said than done, but instead of like, my spouse is not doing this, or they're not meeting my needs here, or I'm doing this, but they're not doing at the same level, and just 100% ownership of what can I do to make my marriage thrive is just, it's so empowering and it's helpful. And something that you said a while back is like our ability to have our interests change. Like there can be numerous things about your life that seem so boring to me. I mean, I got into homeschool curriculum. Isn't that bizarre? Like I really started caring about that.
You've gotten to all of it.
I didn't want to hear about it at all when we down that path.
Yeah.
And vice versa with different, I guess, theological subjects. And you've gotten into and even at times some sports subjects, at times. But those are kind of some obvious ones. But it was, it's fun. Even just on our team meeting yesterday, Lauren mentioned how it was a highlight for her that she had a late night date with her husband, and they went to a minor league hockey game, or like a farm league hockey game. And I may be way off here, but I'm assuming that's more of like her husband's interest that she got excited about, and who knows, maybe I'm completely off on this. I think he's the Canadian in their marriage. And so, but that was like so fun to hear, because it's like, that is like, you can do that. You can get excited about things that you otherwise wouldn't have been excited about, or that previously you were not that excited about. But we get so fixated on like our interests. We're like, well, these are my interests, so, and I'm done being interested in things. It's like, that's not how we are as humans.
Yeah, it's never good to have that fixed mindset with anything, but especially stuff like that. And I also think, you're talking about interests. Oh man, I lost my train of thought, and it was going to be so good.
Well, I wonder if it has something to do with that baby that's starting to cry in the other room.
No, yes. Okay, hold on. I'm going to see if he goes back to bed, though. Okay. Give him a couple minutes. Because, what I was going to say is it's not like parenting can't be a dual interest together either. There's a difference just parenting and then making it an interest. There are seasons when Elisha and I go through, how can we optimize our parenting? And we're both reading books on parenting. We're both trying new things as parents. And parenting for a season has become a real interest for both of us, and something that we're bonding over. So we aren't just existing through it, we're learning and growing together in it. And so when we're talking about parenting, it's not from this reactive standpoint, but are like, oh, we could implement this in our home. That would be cool. How's this going that we're trying, and stuff like that. But I feel like more often than not, it's the woman that thinks it would be really fun to talk about how to optimize your marriage and how to optimize your parenting. And guys can be a little slower usually to be like, oh, this is so exciting.
Like it's an exciting
I just
topic.
want to talk about relationships and how to optimize those. And so something that can be fun is, if you would like that to be something that you bond over in your marriage, is not leading with that and starting the relational pursuit of your husband by being like, what does he enjoy? You mentioned the hockey, and just being like, our husbands want companionship. I think so often sex and respect are mentioned as things that our husbands appreciate, but we don't hear, I don't know who came up with the top 5 needs of a man. I don't know if it was a man, but I think it was, but companionship is one of those that's really high up there. And that just means friendship and hanging out and doing things that our spouse wants us to do. And so, or wants to do with us. And so thinking, okay, what's something that I can just get into with my husband that's going to shock him and be like, what? You care about that? You want to do that with me? And, going hunting or going skiing or going on the back of a motorcycle or, something.
Yeah.
And starting there and starting to build relationship there. And that can trickle into starting to build relationship over these things that maybe you're more interested in.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyways.
What's crazy is that you you played music prior to getting married. So you've been a musician. I was going
to bring that up. We had a fun time the other night.
That was last night. Like that was like such an irresponsible use of like 9 hours yesterday. Honestly, it's like we got up, we worked, we did homeschool. Okay, maybe not 9 hours, but we both kind of like geeked out a little bit over.
It was
we were
after
like,
dinner.
Let's do this song.
Yeah, I still have my little hippie braid here in my hair. It doesn't go with my outfit at all.
Yeah, I mean, maybe actually I'll get that photo cover to Luke and he can put it up on the screen.
Yes,
because I don't know if we'll ever use it. But,
okay, you guys. So yeah, you tell him.
well, I mean, you sound like you're ready to tell
Elisha
it. So.
writes awesome music, and he's been saying for a while, like, "Oh, it'd be cool if you could sing with me on this song."
Yeah, I've always wanted that.
Yeah, well, that's sweet of him. I do not have an award-winning voice.
Well, neither do I. That's
his
why
music is
need you to join me.
awesome. And so last night we just got out in front of this brick wall and took a picture of us. We got inspiration off like indie hipster album art covers, and we're like, the key is to look really like kind of pathetic. And so we took an awesome pathetic looking photo.
I don't know if pathetic's the right word. Maybe like depressed or melancholy.
Depressed, yeah.
Introspective.
Which is so funny because Elisha just reminded me this is a full circle moment, because I was arguing with him when I was 18 and we were just talking how Christians should not make themselves look depressed on their album art covers, because it's not artistic, and you should have the joy of the Lord shining through your face when you're on an album cover singing a Christian song. And I mean, I argued that with you for hours. And then he just reminded me the other day.
And this was your idea. You're like, hey, like, let's do it. Let's pose just like this couple. I'm like the ultra, like, depressed looking couple.
Oh, my
okay.
word. But it is artsy, isn't it?
Yeah, but I brought that story up. Yeah, it is. But I brought that story up because, like, that was really fun. It was so out of the ordinary for our marriage. And like our kids thought we were kind of crazy.
We had Leon holding the camera.
Yes.
Lawrence was out here crawling on the ground. And we're like
moving lights around.
And we're just sitting there so tranquil, staring
and then I
at the
call
camera.
Luke that afternoon. And I'm like, hey, can you come over tonight after the kids are in bed and shoot a video? And he's gracious and he's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, what? Like, what is this? It's like, well, we're singing a song. And it's like, what? Like, this is so random. You guys are so random. And so,
but it was so fun. Like, it was like the ultimate date. And we did have our children here, but they were just getting a kick out of watching us. And it was so fun to do something totally out of the ordinary. We aren't famous musicians, but it was just fun to pretend for a night that we were.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And we did put our song up, though. Of course, you guys can listen to it.
Yeah, I think actually we are going to post it. So it's over on our other YouTube channel now.
Yeah, we'll put the link down below for you guys. You can hear our alter egos coming out. The song's called Talk About the Weather. I think it's a pretty great song. I think it's actually phenomenal lyrically, the way Elisha wrote it. And then our execution... My execution.
You did great.
Is whatever it is.
Maybe
what it
someday
is.
we'll like do like a studio, like we'll actually like go into a studio and
instead of just a little garage recording. But
Yeah.
it was fun.
we should wrap this thing up.
Yes, we should. The baby hasn't gone back to bed, so we'll see you guys next week.
Folks, thank you all so much. Talk to you next week. Bye bye.